Welcome back. It's always more fun implementing new functionality and new endpoints. Let's have some fun. So far, we've built an endpoint for our planets collection, which gets a list of potentially habitable destination exoplanets. But what about our launches? These upcoming and historical missions that are tracked by our NASA Mission Control application. It makes sense for us to start by thinking about what collections we need and what models those collections would require. Just like we had a planets model, it makes sense for us to have a launches model which we add to as we schedule new launches. And this will correspond to our launches collection with a launches router and controller. Let's start with our launch model. I'll start by creating launches. We're keeping our naming plural here, .model.js. What are we going to be keeping track of in this model? We can start by looking at what functionality our UI will require, this front end that we have over here. So page by page, we know that in our launch page, we need to schedule a launch date, which might correspond well with a JavaScript date object. We also need a mission name. That's a string like hello Kepler exoplanets, whatever we want to call that mission. A rocket type, also a string. One of these destination exoplanets, which we refer to by name. And we know that when we submit that mission, when we launch that mission, it's going to get scheduled for launch on the date we selected. So that's when we're going to add it to our launches collection in our API. But hold on, let's not forget about our two other pages. So in upcoming, we can see the list of data that we store for each of our launches. We have this number that corresponds to the flight number for that mission. This is a new piece of data. Then we have the date, the mission name, and the rocket, like we just saw, as well as that destination exoplanet. So far, so good. What about our history page? It stores a similar set of data with the addition of this customers column. Each of our missions is funded by, and each of our missions carries a series of payloads, these machines and satellites that are going to be used in outer space by our customers, by our organizations that are funding these missions. These can be things like NASA themselves. Maybe it's the military, or a university, or even organizations like the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, which can do some really cool research predicting how events happening in our solar system and outer space affect our weather here on Earth. And that's just one of the ways that we can use these satellites to advance scientific research. So each of our launches will track one or more customers that are making use of that launch for their purposes. Let's put what we've just discovered in writing into some pseudocode that we can use as a starting point to design and build our launches model. Say we want to store our launch in an object. So we'll say const launch, and then this launch will store a series of properties and values. Let's use this to build out an example launch. We'll start with the mission or mission name, which can be something like Kepler Exploration X. And we'll also have that rocket name, which we saw could be something like Explorer IS-1. We also had the launch date, which is some day in the future, that we can track as a JavaScript date object. So we'll construct a new date, and our launch is going to be, say, on the birth date of Johannes Kepler, who the Kepler Space Telescope was named after. So December 27th, and we'll schedule our launch for the year 2030, with its destination being, say, Kepler-442b, my absolute favorite exoplanet. We'll also keep track of the official flight number for this launch, a sequential number which tells us which launch this is, which can act as a unique identifier for this mission. We'll call this our flight number, and we can say that it starts at 100 and goes up from there, one by one. Next up, we have our list of customers. So this can be an array which contains the names as strings. So maybe it's NASA and Zero to Mastery, both as customers for Kepler Exploration X. Now, we also need a way of differentiating between upcoming and historical launches. We could check this date and see whether it's in the future or not, and use that as a metric for whether our launch is upcoming. But we could have launches that are scheduled for future dates, which are aborted. Remember, in our upcoming list, we could click this X button to abort a mission, which means it probably makes sense to track whether a mission is upcoming or not as its own Boolean variable. We'll say upcoming starts off as true and only becomes false once this launch becomes a historical launch. And finally, these missions aren't always going to go according to plan. We need to prepare for all eventualities. So at the very least, for historical missions that have already launched or failed or been aborted, we'll keep track of this success variable, which is also a Boolean. Now we're optimists, so let's start off with success being true by default. We have a pretty good collection of data that we now need to track. So how do we add a launch to our launches collection? We could have a launches array, which starts off empty, but we'll use an even better JavaScript data structure. We're going to make use of the JavaScript map object. This works a lot like a plain old JavaScript object, where we map string keys to values. Flight number is our string implicitly. We could also say flight number, and 100 is our numerical value. The difference with maps is that they allow us to map any value to any other value. For example, we could map numbers to objects like dates or strings, and if we're really being crazy, we could even map functions to values in our map as well. They're a lot more flexible than our JavaScript objects. And they also have this really great feature where they preserve the order you insert things. You always get back values in the order you put them in, which is not guaranteed when you're going through the keys of an object. To make a map, we call our new keyword to construct a new map object. We can now add launches to our launches map by calling the launches.set function and passing in a key and a value. Notice that they can both be any value, any type. Simple keys and values are easy to work with, but it depends how crazy we want to get. For us, we'll be indexing our launches. That is, we'll be searching through them and accessing them by the flight number. The flight number makes a natural ID that's unique for each of our launches. So our map is going to map flight numbers to launch data. And the way we do that is by passing in launch.flightNumber as the key and the launch itself as the value. We could now access our launches by calling the launches.get function and passing in our key, our flight number, for example, 100. This would return our launch object. But instead of doing that, we're going to export our launches map from our model so that we can use it in the rest of our code. So we'll say module.exports an object that contains the launches. For now, just the one launch in our example here. We're all set to build our launches router and expose our launches model to our front end using our Express API. Let's keep going in the next video. I'll see you soon.